Welcome to Mic'd Medicated. We are here with Dr. Laura Fechter. She is a clinical psychologist. She specializes in infidelity.
Love and marriage. Oops.
Love and
opposite.
marriage, infidelity, and also really interesting helping couples navigate the decision-making around building a family and the various ways to do that. So I'd love to let you introduce yourself, Laura. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. So basically, I started working with individuals and couples on family planning after my own experience in fertility and figuring out how my husband and I were going to build a family. We got married. I was 29 when I got married, and shortly thereafter, we started trying to have kids. And when it didn't happen right away, as is the case for many people, we consulted with a reproductive endocrinologist and did, a bunch of IUIs and things like that, moved on to IVF. And I think it was after my second IVF that I said to my husband, you know what, maybe we were meant to adopt. And he said, maybe we were. And that was sort of the extent of our conversation about adoption. And when the second IVF didn't work, we decided to look into adoption more extensively. And I remember they tell you never to do this. They tell you to just do one process at a time. If you're doing infertility treatment, focus on that. If you're pursuing adoption, focus on that. They're both like very rigorous on you emotionally. And so don't do both at once. But of course I did both at once.
And you can end up with two kids at the same time.
That happens to be
Actually, that happened to someone in my family. She got pregnant, and just as her adoption process went through.
Yeah.
And so she has kids that are literally, 2 months apart.
Yeah, that definitely happens.
I think there's science to support the idea that stress is a big barrier for some. I mean, obviously there's so many factors in whether or not you can conceive, but somehow taking the pressure off of having an alternate path you're pursuing, you're more relaxed.
Yeah, I mean,
I personally don't believe that, only because there are babies that are born, during wartime. There are babies that are born.
You're absolutely right. I always think about that.
Horrendous experiences, women that are victimized, end up getting pregnant.
Women gave birth in the Holocaust. I mean, they did.
So, but I agree with you that is a theory as to why that happens. So I did my third IVF while I was doing all the adoption paperwork. When they told me the third IVF didn't work, I popped the adoption paperwork in the mail. That was, I remember clearly, November 18th. By December 23rd, I had my son in my arms.
Oh,
yeah. Which is very unusual, by the way, that happens.
I was going to say, I feel like the process is really, really hard. And I think, luckily, because science has advanced, that the people who couldn't adopt can do that. But I don't know. I would hope that they would make it faster so people could become parents who want to become parents.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of red tape, especially internationally. I mean, there are so many children available to be adopted internationally who are living in baby homes or orphanages. And because the process is so involved, those kids are just kind of languishing in those orphanages.
I guess I just am not very knowledgeable about this topic, but what I don't get is exactly that. How come they haven't found a way to speed up the process and put babies in loving parents' arms? Also, it's incredibly expensive, right?
Exactly. Yes, definitely. Yeah, there are a lot of barriers in terms of paperwork, and there are things that are important to do, like a home.
This is literally New York City. I'm so sorry. From the dogs barking to the sirens.
Okay.
This is one of those, you know what? This is such a perfect way to say life happens, we just had Dr. Rachel Goldman on, and it's you just have to kind of go the way it goes. You can plan for, getting married and both of you and conceiving, in a romantic drunk night, and that's not how it necessarily works out.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the sirens go off and you just, and you're like, should I stay in New York City or should I go? So going back to couples, you're very lucky that you and your husband, when that happened,
we were on the same page.
Right. Because I imagine you didn't say to your husband, if we can't have a baby naturally, the old fashioned way, would you adopt? That was probably nothing you asked. talked about?
It was literally that conversation. Like maybe we're just.
I mean,
meant
I'm
to
saying
adopt,
before you
maybe
got
we are.
married.
No, we never
Right.
talked about it.
But because you counsel couples in your professional work, I imagine that's not the common scenario.
You know, sometimes women have a sense that they might have some difficulty conceiving, like they've had endometriosis early on, or maybe they only have one ovary because of like a medical condition that they've had. And so then they do have those conversations early, maybe with someone that they're just dating, like,
Right.
I might not be able to have kids biologically. How would you feel about adopting? I have had couples where that's been an early conversation, but you're right. More often than not, people try to get pregnant, can't, and then it's a conversation that evolves about what do we do now? Do we do IVF and just keep doing it and doing it and doing it until it works? If it works, do we switch to something like donor egg or donor sperm, or do we pursue adoption
Or have a surrogate? I know. I feel like it's actually so much more complicated now because there's so many scientific options that I almost feel like you kind of probably, I would imagine, getting overwhelmed of like, how do you really know? Where I feel like maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was like, okay, we are meant to adopt.
Right.
But I think it would just, I imagine as accounts that I don't know what the options were when you were trying to have kids. But
Yeah,
did that
no.
ever occur to you? Were you thinking I'm going to do an egg donor or?
Yeah, donor egg was kind of new, believe it or not. I'll never forget going to the IVF clinic, and you typically go in the morning for all of your blood work and monitoring, but I happened to have an appointment in the afternoon at around 2, and I go into the waiting room and there are all these young women in like crop tops and like jeans, like their like bellies are out there.
Oh my
like,
God.
belly button rings, and I'm like, who are these women? Then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, these are the donors. It was like the donor egg.
Oh, that's
I'm
so
dying.
People
funny.
waiting
Like
for
20
their
year olds.
appointments. Yeah, they were waiting for their appointments because they need to do blood work and monitoring and retrievals.
It's
and all
a
that.
lot easier to be a sperm donor.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, it really is.
And probably a lot more fun.
I mean, yeah, it is true. There's it's not really a joke, but I guess kind of funny. I had when somebody in my family was looking for an egg donor and they wanted a Jewish one. It was like impossible.
Yeah.
There was like no Jewish women donating their eggs because they're not going to go through that if they're not going to like reap the benefit. Do you know what I mean?
Like, you're not going to do that without a push present.
Right. It's like, no way,
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny.
Actually, talking about Judaism and culture, do you, I don't know. So you adopted
Yes.
two kids who are your babies. Who actually they're not babies anymore.
No, they're
I was gonna
21
say-
and 18, almost 18.
They're grown-ups.
Yeah.
If a kid is born with a different culture than you are, their birth culture,
Mm-hmm.
as the mom of that child, do you bring that into the conversation for them, or do you just or do you raise them whatever culture you grew up? So I know you're wearing your Star of David, you're Jewish. Do you think about any other aspects of that? Or
That's interesting. So I think it's very important with kids who are adopted to embrace all aspects of identity. And that just helps them with their own identity formation. So, for example, I am part of an interfaith couple, so it makes it even more complicated. So I'm Jewish, my husband's Catholic. My kids were raised with exposure to both religions, but in terms of like rites of passage, they were raised with the Jewish rites of passage. Like they had bar and bat mitzvahs. But we celebrate Christmas with my husband's large Italian family. We have a great time at Christmas, Easter. But then on top of that, my daughter is half Puerto Rican.
okay,
Which you would never know because she's half Puerto Rican, half like Scottish. So the Scottish genes definitely won out. She's like very fair with blue eyes. But that Latino culture piece is very important to her. That's like a big source of her identity. And she will even say like, I'm Latino and Jewish, or like, and also Italian. Like she will include that in describing her identity. And we embrace that. Like if we went to Puerto Rico once as a family and, we'll like talk about that. Like, oh, Estella, you're Puerto Rican too.
Did you tell her or did she feel it? I know that sounds like a crazy thing, but
when you adopt domestically, you do get some information about the birth parents' ethnicity and culture. So that was something that was in her documentation. But then we did 23andMe, talk about like science, right? And technology. And it was confirmed, in fact, that was the case.
Which is actually important for children that are adopted for health records benefits,
Absolutely.
I would imagine. Right.
But look at kids who are adopted internationally. I mean, there's so many kids, for example, who were adopted from China. Now, the China program is not as robust as it used to be, but that used to be a very, very popular program for American families to adopt from China. A lot of the people who adopted from China in the New York area were Jewish families, in fact. And there is a whole group in the city of families who adopted from China who are also Jewish, raising their kids Jewish. And so they expose them to their Chinese culture. They often go to Chinese school on Saturdays to like learn Mandarin, but they're like bar and bat mitzvah and exposed to that culture as well. So it's just great to embrace all aspects of culture for kids. It just helps them so much.
When you would think about adopting a baby, right? I think when everybody sees a beautiful newborn, it's almost like a clean slate, like you're starting from scratch. But we all know that's not the truth, right? I mean, forget just biology. There is a sense that it starts in utero. So
absolutely.
How do you, how do you deal with that with your children in terms of, do they ever have feelings of abandonment or,
yeah, I mean, that's a big theme in adoption. And I also work with adult adoptees. So that's been an interesting component to the work. And abandonment is a big theme for people who were adopted, even if they were adopted as newborns. There's a sense that you were given up, right? Or given away. And why was that?
Do you feel, based on your experience working with people, is that a feeling that is innate because of what Caroline's talking about, that sort of in utero experience that maybe they can't identify or touch or speak about, but it's there? Or is that just because on an intellectual level, when you know you're adopted, you know that there is some biological, parent out there who for whatever reason isn't raising you. And so that is something you have to figure out, or probably ideate around what those reasons are.
I think it's both. I really do. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a sense that you heard your birth mother for 9 months, heard her speaking to you, or birth family, birth parents, birth siblings. And that, there's a trauma.
I certainly, when I was pregnant, felt like there was some deep connection. And I would, you see those parents who put like the Einstein on their
that was definitely like another level.
Oh, I did not do that.
I don't
think
I'm
just
you did.
Saying it's
playing Beethoven.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I always was somebody who thought about and would have loved to adopt. So I don't know if that's, some people just feel that way. Others,
You actually, after having 3 children biologically, wanted to adopt.
I would have. Well, my husband did not want a 4th child. That was sort of out of the question. And I assumed he meant biologically. So I was like, we should adopt. That would be so beautiful. And I thought it would just be beautiful for our children. And as you said, there are lots of kids out there, babies out there who, kids or babies,
right,
it doesn't matter what age, who don't have homes. So if you can afford to take on another child, like, it just feels like such a beautiful thing. So I don't know if that was part of your thought process, just in terms of the mitzvah you were doing in taking on children who otherwise might grow up in orphanages, etc.
I mean, my kids, look, I adopted my kids as newborns. If it hadn't been us, there would have been like 10 people in line to adopt my kids. But for me, it wasn't important to me to be pregnant. And I think that's something I tease apart with my patients, because that's a big part of the decision making when people are figuring out, like, do I want to use, let's say IVF doesn't work for people. Right. And they're like, okay, what are my next steps? Do I want to do donor egg? Do I want to adopt? How important is it to you to have that experience of being pregnant, to feel like, or surrogacy? You mentioned surrogacy before. How important is that experience to me? Do I want to carry my child? Do I feel like that's going to provide some connection? Or is that not important to me? To me, it wasn't important. I just wanted a baby. I agree.
I would have had more children had pregnancy not been the component, because it was just very hard for me physically and emotionally.
But I would have been a surrogate. I loved.
Isn't that funny though? The difference.
Everybody's so different.
No. For me, it was traumatic because I had anxiety, and it can heighten that. And I'm sure that's why, maybe could be why my son is pretty anxious. The first, actually, both my kids, but that's a whole nother story.
I think it's also birth orders. So
yeah, that is something. But I do think, what's interesting is people don't talk about it with surrogacy, about what is that 9 months baby? Does that baby bring Like, what is that? They're not a clean slate either in the sense, right?
Yeah. And I think for people, because I've worked with people who have used surrogates a few times, and, I think it's a hard experience for the mother who's not carrying her own child to feel like it's a very out of control.
I was just going to say, it's you're letting the universe do its thing.
And it's the same thing with adoption. You're not surrogacy. You're more in control of the prenatal care. You can really like dictate that, and it's part of the contract.
But you're not living with them.
You're not living with them. Adoption, it's completely out of your control. The prenatal care, and often, I mean, both of my kids, our birth moms were 9 months pregnant when we matched with them. We had no control over the prenatal care. But with surrogacy,
for some reason, isn't that better? Like you kind of didn't have to have that extra stress of every second along the way, monitoring it.
Yeah.
Like you got to the
finish line.
Yes, you got to the finish line.
It also has to do with whether you believe how important that is, because
science says prenatal care is important.
Believe you can't drink, you can't eat turkey, you can't have sushi. Like,
I think that's
all
science,
of those things. But we also know before all of that,
absolutely.
Like,
my mom ate from chirping chicken every day. Apparently,
right?
I can't look
guess,
at chicken.
Like, part of me feels like as a culture we've just become so anal and weirdly obsessive with these things to have some semblance of control, but control doesn't exist.
Right.
Well, also, I think control doesn't exist for anything, children, marriage, which is why I find that family planning, it's like it really is both people, no matter how you're doing it, have to let go of control. Like, how do you see that with couples? Like, I really feel like when my husband and I got married, it was actually, I always knew it could take a while because I had an aunt who waited. She was married young and she put her career first. And then by the time she started, she was close to 40 and she did end up having 2 biological kids through IVF, but it was hell. It was like 10 years and it was just, she should, whatever it was, that was the route she kept choosing. But I saw that and I was like, okay, I don't know what my journey's going to be. So when my husband and I got married and he was 30 and I was 27, I was like, okay, like we should try to have kids. And he's like, what? Like let's be married. I'm like, I don't know how long it's going to take. And I think these are questions people don't talk about. We never said to each other though, like, what if your sperm's bad? What if my eggs don't work? Should we get a donor? Like, should we, should we adopt? Should we not? Like, those are questions I feel like couples should have.
Yeah. In terms of like having it figured out beforehand, I don't think most couples do. And, some couples don't make it through the process. I mean, because they really are at odds in terms of, what each would consider. Like, there was a couple I worked with many, many years ago and one wanted to adopt and one wouldn't consider it at all. And they were totally at an impasse, but it was kind of a metaphor.
I was about to say
they were as a couple.
Right.
Like
if you're meant to work, you're meant to work.
Like, because if you don't get through this, then if you had children easily, you wouldn't get through the next big life obstacle.
Right.
I actually want to kind of pivot a little and ask you about like this growing trend of women proactively saying, I'm not interested in having kids. Like I want to pursue my career. I want to travel. I have passions, whatever it might be. But, when I was growing up, it was just a kind of unheard of. I was surrounded by very high.
Then your grandma say like, when are you getting married? When are you having your baby?
I'm saying the opposite. Like I was surrounded by very high achieving women, but like nobody considered not getting married and having a family.
That's what I just said. That's saying you do that first. When you're getting married, when you're having the baby. No, your grandma didn't ask you about your job.
No, I'm saying that I'm saying
mine didn't.
I'm saying I agree with you that like this new trend where a lot of women are deciding like proactively before they have any issues or problems, like I just might not want to be a mother. Like there's all these articles about how motherhood's not all it's cracked up to be. And so I'm curious if you see that more, because I'm saying what you're saying, which is I grew up and everybody was about get married and have kids.
You're not saying like freezing eggs in terms of insurance. You're saying people deciding to be childless.
Yeah, like I keep reading about these women and it's funny because we put together notes in preparation for our conversation with you and we do research, and I found myself like in stream of consciousness like putting the word selfish in the notes, and then I was like, it's not necessarily selfish, but our societal norms, that was the word I used because I guess grew up in that framework of moms are selfless and having children is selfless when really everyone operates in their own self-enlightened interest. But like a woman choosing not to have kids isn't selfish. That's the
Oprah.
wrong way to talk
Oprah
about
famously
Right.
did that. I feel like she used to talk about, because her audience was kind of a stay-at-home mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to say, like, being a mom is the hardest job, and I chose not to do it because I couldn't do both jobs well. I couldn't be Oprah and be a mom. So I think
Right.
it's actually more selfless to decide
totally
not to be a
agree.
mom.
I
it.
totally
Right,
agree.
right.
But I get how your
Interesting.
brain is trained. But
Yeah, I think that there are so many women who become parents who really aren't happy in that role and don't parent in a way that helps their kids to thrive. I mean, sadly, there are kids that are mistreated, there are kids who are abused, there are kids who are
Right.
neglected. So someone who like looks into themselves and says like, I don't think I want to do this, I don't have this in me, I don't think I'd be good at this, I think that is very selfless.
Do you think that's what's going on, like in your practice?
I've seen couples out of the infertility process come to the decision in terms of like, you talk about like resolution in that process.
Mhm.
And as part of their resolution, they decide we're going to live child free. And we have enough, but you really need a very special kind of couple because you need to have a sense of legacy in other ways.
That's very
There's
interesting.
a very famous, very, very famous psychologist, Eric Erickson, who talked about all the different stages of life. And one of the very important stages in later life is called generativity versus stagnation. And your sense of generativity as a person could come from a lot of things. It could come from children, like it's like, what are you going to leave behind in this world, when
What
you're
do they
no
say at your
longer here?
eulogy?
Right. And so it could be your children is your generativity. It could be your job is your generativity. It's like your legacy. It's what you've worked towards. It's your passion. It's your baby. So for couples that decide not to have children, they have to find that generativity in other ways or else they'll be stagnant,
That's
and
so
it
fascinating.
could be like a hobby that they love. It could be they love to travel and they travel all over
But
the
how does
world
that
together.
help with the legacy aspect?
Well, it just helps them feel alive and feel fresh and feel like they have a passion in their relationship and that they're just doing things that, help them
Right.
grow.
Like rather than relying on your kids having children and sort of having grandchildren as your, like what keeps you going every day in those kind of twilight years, you're saying you need a special couple to like find that within themselves and not rely on that grandchild
from an external source. Yeah.
And I think what you were saying, which I also think is interesting, because when you said legacy, my head went to where Caroline's went, which is, a lot of people, like, I feel if I leave 3 good, productive human beings in the world, like that is my best legacy as a human being, as a mother. But then perhaps, there's also the legacy of what
Oprah.
are you doing for the broader society? And so it's not about leaving 3 children, although I would argue if you raise good human beings, that's like the best thing you can do for the world. Because if everyone did that, we'd have a lot of good humans in the world. But like, what are the other things you do in terms of how you give your time to build a better future?
Right. You could like be very philanthropic, right? You could be involved in different charities. So yeah, I mean, I find that with couples, they may decide, you know what, this isn't for me. Like, I'm done with this IVF. Like, it's been nothing but sad and stressful and bringing us down as a couple. And it's not helping us like unite as a couple and grow as a couple. Like, let's live child free and let's like blow that out.
And do you help couples decide like if they're considering, okay, we could be childless, like we're okay with that in the sense that we do feel we have a lot of purpose and a lot of legacy, but there is part of us that really wants to go the adoption route. What do you tell those couples? Because you are you have adopted 2 babies of your own. Like you said, it's not easy being a parent. So what do you say to parents who like, what are the qualities that they need to really possess to not go the childless route, but to adopt?
Look, I think if there's a part of you that wants to be a parent, you need to pursue that because you don't want to have regrets later on.
It's like the itch
life
that will never go away.
Yeah. And I do think that there needs to be some sense, like you never want to have regret, right? You never want to look back and think, oh, we should have done this. My life feels empty because I didn't do it. So we were talking just earlier about this concept of like, coping ahead, planning ahead, thinking about how you might feel later on. And so if you have a sense that later on you might feel like, oh, I should have had that experience, I regret that I didn't, then I think you need to pursue it. But adoption isn't for everyone. There's, involvement potentially with a birth family. There's, there are identity issues for your child and how you're going to help them navigate that. It's definitely a path that has complications, as does donor egg, right? I mean, with couples, when they pursue donor egg, you have to deal with the issue of like, how do you feel when, your husband's biologically connected to the child, but you don't have that biological connection. You have that connection emotionally and in every other way. But how are you going to feel when your mother-in-law says, oh my God, he looks exactly like you, and you feel like you don't see yourself physically in that child?
It's about what you do with that family. There's no correlation between how you get to it and what you do with it. And I think, I don't know, speaking for myself, building a family, having a, partner in my spouse and having, children who I have, strong relationships with, that takes a ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
It is never predictable. Mm-hmm. It is ongoing. Mm-hmm. And, this is so trite, but I always love that phrase, like, love is not a noun, it's a verb. Like,
oh, I love that.
Love isn't something that like happens or is. Love is something you make and do every single day.
Mm-hmm. No, and also like nurture is a huge part about everything. Even like I feel like people always say couples start to look like each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes, or owners look like their dogs.
That is true.
Or their dogs look like them.
Or I'll be doing something. Even I've been spending so much time with Eva. Sorry, but you snort sometimes. And sometimes I'll be like, I'll snort or something. I'm like, oh my God. Or like, I bet Eva always microwaves her coffee. I never do that. I don't need to have it so hot. But now, because I'm around her, I'm starting to do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually I think it's so fascinating. I'm sure you see that with your kids, like how much they do that are just your habitual idiosyncrasies.
That brings up the whole nurture versus nature.
It's huge.
I'm curious, Laura, like, because I always wonder with my children, like, how much are they genetically hardwired to be the way they are, and how much is what I do? And I joke,
right, like, how much am I fucking them up, or how much is biology?
I joke it's 99% genetics, 1% nurture, and I don't
agree.
I say that's so freeing. Like, it's so liberating to know my kids are going to be just who they're going to be, regardless of how well I parent. That? Sometimes, but
I think environment is huge.
But I guess, Laura, what's your perspective?
Definitely not 99. That's crazy.
Look, I think
a lot of pressure on your genes.
One of the things that's really freeing about adoption is that you do have this sense that your child's not going to be, I hate that expression, mini me. Your child's not.
Parents get really stuck in that.
Absolutely. And I don't like that expression for anyone, because I think your child should be allowed to just be who they are. Like,
I think you're
temperament
totally right.
wise, and, just in terms of their self-expression. And so when you've adopted a child, there's no expectation that they're going to be your mini me, physically, in terms of mannerisms or behavior,
that's nurture.
It is amazing when you see yourself so much in them, but there's no expectation. So it's actually very freeing to just imagine, like, I'm going to let this little person just evolve into who they are and see what that looks like. And
you're just going to water them, give them sunlight.
No, I agree, because I feel like it was different when I had my son, but when I had my daughter, I feel like I could start to feel that. And I was like, I'm going to push that away. Mm-hmm. Like, I always wanted to do this kind of ballet or do this. And I'm like, that's not her. Like, I'm not putting that on her. But even recently, my son has got some anxiety. And I noticed, I was talking to a teacher, psychologist about it. And I kept saying, well, when I was in that grade, I was doing that. And the psychologist was like, well, you're not your son.
Right.
But I couldn't help myself. But like, he's a totally different person. Right. I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting. So my mom's parents got divorced when she was like, it was the 50s, when she was like 1.
Yeah.
That's
unusual.
Very unusual. And my grandma remarried when she was like 5 years old, and her husband adopted my mom. So her biological father didn't raise her. And he was alive. And I'm actually close with her sister, who she became close with that they had the same father. But my point about this is, and I felt bad, he said, but I never considered him a grandfather. Mm-hmm. Not the one who, her birth father
raised her.
Oh. No, I considered the one who raised her.
Oh, yeah.
My grandfather.
Yeah.
And not her birth father at all. And it's just funny. Like I remember running into him on the street and I didn't even go to like, I didn't want to say hi to him, even though I had met him a few times. It was like he was a stranger to me. Sorry, this was so random, but it really is amazing how, and my mom would always say, oh, like I read, and she has so many breakfast habits that are like her adopted father. She grew up with him,
of course,
you know, so she would be like, oh, like and we called him grandpa. She'd be like, oh, I read the newspaper like grandpa and do this. And so I guess also at a young age, I always understood that like who you're around is so important. But I will never forget, like, and this again, I had met him and had a little relationship with him, but it was really weird. Like when he died, I didn't feel anything, even though biologically he was my grandfather.
Right. So biology is not enough necessarily.
No, it's not enough at all. That's my point is like, I'm looking at a photo over there of my biological grandfather who raised me as a like he was so part of my life. I was so devastated when he died. And it was like,
on your father's side.
Yes, my father's father, and my mom's biological father passed away. It was like I felt nothing. But
did you know how they say children are like the truth tellers? You know how children know who puts in the time, like they know who cares about them and puts in the time. I think like, and this may be a beautiful note to end on, but I think it's just this notion that family is about
showing
love and showing up and being there for each other in good times and bad.
Right.
And like,
it doesn't matter
how you're related to each other. It's what you do to build those relationships that matters.
100%. I mean, it's all coming to me, but the proof is in the pudding, right? Like I still think about my grandfather who I have no, not that one. My mom's adopted father, right? He died when I was 6. No biological connection to him. But I still remember him as a grandfather because he showed up. He was there. He was around.
He was your grandfather. I don't think there's a distinction.
Yes, he was. Yes. He was. But you get what I'm saying. The whole point.
Yes.
But now I'm thinking about all those people in my life who I loved.
Yes, but there are lots of ways to build a family.
And you can also be a doggy mom.
Part. Absolutely. Yes, there are many people that decide to have that experience of nurturing something through having fur babies.
And by the way, there are a lot of work.
Saying I've never heard that.
Of course,
baby. Yes.
Is it not your fur? I love my bunny with all my heart and soul.
Bunny is a dog,
but I really I had dogs growing up, but then with our family, bringing Bunny into our life and just all the joy she has brought us, like it's amazing. Like I really do understand that concept of fur babies.
I know on Mother's Day, I always want to be like happy Mother's Day to women who maybe didn't have kids, but they have animals because it is, first of all, they never grow up. So it's a lot of work. They're always around. And like, you have to go to doctor's appointments. And I mean, they are a living, breathing thing. I even have a chameleon. I feel like I have a 4th kid. That even takes work. I'm not even kidding.
The beta fish.
That is never get it. Are they lizards, amphibians? I never know what.
No, I do think it's hard for women who, on those holidays like Mother's Day and things like that. It's like, how do they get acknowledged?
International Women's Day. It's coming up on
March
March
I think 8th. We should have an International Mom of an Animal Day. I really do.
We could do that too, or they could just be Mother's Day.
Or just Mother's Day.
Or an Aunt's Day, right? There are women that nurture their nieces and nephews.
We had an episode with a woman who never had kids, and she is so close to her niece and nephew. My aunt is also very close to me. I agree. They don't get honored. I think you mother in your career. You can have someone who works under you. You know, I feel like you mentor, and I mother each other in very weird ways. You know, that sounded, but you know what I mean. It's we're all.
Laura, before we wrap, is there anything else you'd like to say that we didn't cover?
No, I think the most important thing is that there's no shame and there shouldn't be any secrets. And adoption in particular, because adoption's been around since Moses. I mean, Moses is one of the
he was in the river,
adoption stories,
I love that. Yes.
So that is the template for talking about these things, just because it's been around so long. And it used to be very hush hush. I mean, talk about the 50s. Like if someone was adopted, you wouldn't mention it. You wouldn't even tell the child. But we learned from those mistakes, because invariably people would find out in weird ways. They would find like paperwork or documents after their parents died. Oh my God, I was adopted? What? They never told me.
Right.
And that brought up just a myriad of issues. So what we've learned from that is, you tell your kids early on in age appropriate ways, as as young as possible.
So no stigma.
No stigma. It's always open. It's always just part of your family's narrative and story. Same thing with donor egg. There are fabulous adoption bedtime stories, donor egg bedtime stories. I'm sure there are surrogacy books for kids. And so it's just my kids, I read them. Jamie Lee Curtis wrote a great adoption bedtime story. It's called Tell Me About the Night I Was Born. And I read that to my kids every night when they were little, from the time they were babies. And so it was just always part of our story. It was like, as you know,
it was second nature.
It was second nature to them.
I think it's so critical that everyone have a coherent narrative of who they are, where they came from, why they're who they are. And so I think that's
why we're mic'd, because we
you've
want
given
people
your
to,
kids.
and we want everybody who's listening to this to always feel that no matter what, like, first of all, if you're not hearing the hardships people go through or any challenges, like, then everybody's lying. Because, you know, if everybody was vulnerable and had no shame, you would see an open book.
Right.
And that's just what
But
I think we like to
shame
do.
is, I think, like
Shame
one
is
of
just,
the most
it's the worst feeling.
corrosive, destructive elements
and
you
you
can
don't want it to be transmitted to the child. So I think adoption, because it's been around so long, there's more of a narrative for it. I think with donor egg, it's definitely a more recent phenomenon. And so I hope we get to that place, you know, where someone could say, oh, I built my family through donor egg, you know, or a child would say, oh, you know, I'm here because my mom used a donor egg, you know.
Yeah.
And you know what, at the end of the day, every one of those kids was wanted, loved, and meant to be
absolutely
in the arms of the mom or father that they got.
Absolutely.
No matter how they got there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Mic drop.